We weren't going to get out of here without talking about the NBA Finals. We weren't. We've been doing it every single week. Well, it's been the playoffs up until now. So now we're talking about the NBA Finals, Nuggets versus Heat. The series is currently tied 1-1. If you asked me before the series started, I would have said, hey, I could easily see the Nuggets sweeping the Heat, but I definitely don't see a world where the Heat don't where the Nuggets don't win, right? The Nuggets, to me, that's why I said that I could even see them sweeping the Heat early on, because that's just how I feel. I just feel that from a team perspective, from overall talent, the Nuggets have more options, more weapons, more depth, just the more better players in terms of Jokic, Murray, MPJ, Aaron Gordon. I just feel like these guys are at a higher level, and you can't go down the line for the Heat and give me that many good players. Not good players, but at that level, right? Like Jimmy Butler obviously is great, and then it starts to just taper off really quick for me. Whereas with the Nuggets, I think Jokic is obviously amazing. I think Murray is really good. I think Aaron Gordon and PJ are really solid players. So I just think they have a little more depth, a little more talent. However, the Heat, as they've been doing all playoffs, have made this fun, have made this interesting. The series is tied 1-1. Game 3 is actually tonight, depending on when you're watching this. Game 3 is tonight in Miami, so that should be exciting. One of the big points coming into this playoff series is that a lot of people said, hey, no one cares about the Nuggets. No one cares about the Heat. This isn't really that interesting of a playoff series. I'm not going to watch it. That I don't really care. It's not that interesting. I like this tweet from Vic Lombardi. Ticket demand is higher in Denver than last year's NBA cities. Ticket prices higher in Denver than Miami. TV ratings are highest in Denver by a lot. TV ratings nationally are just as high as last year. So I guess the Nuggets are interesting after all. Shout out to Vic for that. I appreciate that, because again, a lot of people act like the Nuggets are boring. Nikola Jokic is their best player. He's not exciting to watch. He's boring basketball. Hence why a lot of people argue against him winning MVP, just because they feel like, the Nuggets are boring or Jokic is boring. However, clearly the statistics that Vic Lombardi shared there says otherwise. And it's funny that he says ticket prices are higher in Denver than Miami, and that TV ratings are higher in Denver. That's interesting, right? That leads you to believe that maybe Miami doesn't support the team as highly as Denver does. There's a lot to do in Miami, so that's the excuse for whenever someone doesn't support something at a super, super, super high scale in Miami, like they do in other cities, right? Like even Denver, for instance, here in this actual argument, they always love to say, well, there's nothing to do in Denver, but there's so much to do in Miami, right? So that's always the argument, the defense for Miami to give on why they don't support, whether it's their sports teams high enough or whatever the case may be. It's harder to make it in Miami in terms of attention, because attention is spread out all over the place, which, they are right in some regards. So either way, this series is obviously interesting to people. Obviously, basketball fans, NBA fans are watching it and consuming it, because it says that the TV ratings nationally are just as high as last year, which is good. I'm happy to hear that, because it is, a bummer when you think that, teams aren't being watched as much just because they're either not in a popular city, or they don't have the, 3-star players all in one spot. I'm happy to hear that people are watching Nikola Jokic, people are watching Jimmy Butler, people are watching this series. It's still a fun series. It's still interesting. Even if you think like, oh, the Nuggets are capable of sweeping the Heat, or they're, capable of being a way better team than the Heat, it doesn't make it not interesting. Just the fact that the Heat are here makes it interesting. The fact that the Heat have won a game makes it even more interesting. So I think the series will only get better and better in terms of that kind of stuff. Some of the things that you're taking away from it is the Heat, whether it's the coach, whether it's the players, definitely have better post-game press conferences, definitely are better in terms of whether, it's funny, whether it's something that, causes headlines. The Nuggets are more of a low-key team in terms of that kind of stuff. They're kind of like the Patriots, if you will, in terms of how they handle the media. They're just not as fun or interesting. But Miami has kept things interesting. Spoelstra recently had the whole rant where people thought he kind of attacked the reporter for asking a question. The reporter did say that he called her and apologized and say he didn't know why he, took that stance on it. So that was good to hear, at least. But in terms of some interesting content from them, I think one of my favorite things that has been said during this series, well, actually not during the series, but just when, the Heat were getting into the finals, is that Spoelstra was talking about defense, because they were asking him how the Heat have such good defense. And I thought this was an interesting little mention from him.
If your best players aren't defenders, it's hard to create a good defense. We have Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. They care about defending and doing the tough things. It's pretty easy to figure out the rest of the stuff. And
Yeah, see, I like that. See, obviously, Spoelstra's getting a lot of credit because he's done a great job coaching this team. And when you ask how is this team doing so good, they've had injuries to major players on the team. They don't have as many, like I said, as much depth or as much high skill players. I feel like they're more streaky. They get guys who go off on games, and if they don't go off, from a 3-point perspective or whatever it is, and they really kind of struggle. And so you ask yourself, how does this team still compete? How is this team in the finals? How does this team get there? And part of it is defense, right? And when it comes to defense, it's this thing where some people don't even care about defense on a team. They feel like, hey, just score more points. Who cares about how you play defense? But I like that the Heat care about it. They focus on it. They coach it, but they also understand the fact that your best players have to play good defense, and that the rest will fall in line. And what he means by that kind of is not just like, oh, they have to be good defenders, but also that they care about it so much and they make it a focal point. They don't like just kind of push it off in coaching or in practice, that the rest of the players fall in line with it as well. And, want to be good defenders and want to be like the leaders on the team. And so that's a really, I think that's a cool, talking point. And it's a cool thing to hear a coach say and hear, players that are doing that. And I think it's an interesting thing to see what other teams are focusing on defense in that way. What other teams have their best players totally bought in on defensive side of the ball. Really good defenders. And this is why when you hear a lot like the draft is coming up, right? This is why a lot of times you hear this guy's a really great defender and he's in the lottery. And you're like, well, he's not like super, super crazy on the offensive end, but he's so good at defense. He can shoot the three. The 3-and-D kind of guys are so highly touted because those are the variables that you need, right? Like, certain guys can score all day long, but they can't play defense. And that's a vulnerability. That makes you that's a glaring weakness on a team. You can't, it's hard to hide that. So in this case, you got a guy like Jimmy Butler who could put up, points, but also really cares about the defense. You got a guy like Bam who could put up points, but really cares about the defense. And so that's how you should be building a team. In this case, we see a good blueprint, I think, in this case where teams maybe who, don't have the 3 stars or have two, future Hall of Famers, two, best in the league kind of guys, a team like the Heat, where you see Jimmy Butler, Bam. I know they got some injuries, and those players that got injured helped them get here. But at the end of the day, when you see that, it's got to be motivational. It's got to be a something to build off of in a way to kind of formulate your team and build around your team. You need a guy who's a dog. You need a guy who's a monster on defense, a guy who cares about it, and a guy who can score all day whenever he wants to at will. That's Jimmy Butler. You get you one of those, and then your next best player, you got to get him to buy in on defense. You got to make it so he can score points, and you get another, and you just keep compiling those kind of guys, and then it's contagious at that point. This might almost sound like obvious, but it's not. And we've seen teams fail in the playoffs. I believe because of this. Some of these teams that failed, not all of them, but some of the teams that failed in the playoffs, I do believe is because they don't have guys who are dogs. And being a part of being a dog is caring about defense, right? Because if you're a dog and that's in you, that's in your heart, that's in your gut, then you're going to care about defense just because you don't want to get beat like that. So it is what it is. But I think that the Heat, are giving themselves a fighting chance because of guys like Jimmy Butler. And if your team doesn't have a guy like that, which I'm not naming any names, you can name them in the comments. You know who I'm talking about. There's some teams who don't have dogs, man, on defense. When it comes to winning, they just don't care as much. And there was also a quote from Jimmy Butler where he said, my focus, I'm not pressed to score points. Like, that's not my focus. I'm pressed to win games. Again, get you a player like Jimmy Butler, and you will have more success. It is what it is. And when I say, of course, if everyone had Jimmy Butler, of course, I don't mean just Jimmy Butler, like, the guy who could put up 40. I'm talking about Jimmy Butler, the dog. Jimmy Butler, the guy who plays good defense. Jimmy Butler, the guy who has all the heart and is willing his team and is contagious for his team. That's what I'm saying. That is all I have for the NBA Finals, because obviously it's still early in the series. It's just these two teams left. We know who they are. There's no real questions here, but I am curious who you think will win the series and how many games. So if you think it's Nuggets in 7, put Nuggets in 7 in the comments. If you think it's the Heat in 7 or the Heat in 6, get crazy. Get crazy and say it. Heat in 5, get crazy. Put it in the comments. I want to chop it up with you guys in there about it. Let's go ahead and move on to topic number 3.